Right now, there's a huge problem that almost nobody is talking about. The American dream, the one where you own your own house, is turning into an absolute nightmare for a shocking number of people. A crazy new number just came out. 1.2 million American households are now trapped. They're underwater on their mortgages, which means they owe more money on their loan than their house is even worth. If they wanted to sell, they'd literally have to pay the bank to move out. And as crazy as that sounds, it gets worse. The latest data shows this problem is getting bigger. That number represents about 2.2% of all homes with a mortgage. And another 3.2 million homeowners are teetering on the edge, with almost no equity, one small market dip away from joining the underwater club. That means this isn't just a statistic about somebody else in some distant part of the country. This is a pressure point sitting quietly under the entire housing market. And pressure points are dangerous because they look harmless until something pushes on them. So how did we get here? How did the insane housing market of a few years ago crash so hard that it left over 1 million families in this position? And the most important question, could your house be next? Because once you understand who got trapped first, you start to see who could get trapped next. And that's where this story stops being just interesting and starts becoming personal. In this video, I'm going to show you the 2 main reasons the 7-year high crisis happened. We'll expose the toxic combo of a changing market and risky loans that put so many people in danger. I'll show you exactly which cities are sinking the fastest and what the rest of 2026 looks like. But the most important part comes later, because by the end of this video, you'll see why this crisis isn't really about a nationwide crash. It's about a very specific kind of homeowner getting squeezed from both sides at once. This isn't about scaring you. It's about understanding how the market actually works, so you can protect your biggest asset. So what does underwater actually mean? It's way simpler than it sounds. On paper, it just means your mortgage is bigger than what your home is worth today. If you have a $400,000 mortgage on a house that's now only worth $380,000, boom, you are $20,000 underwater. You might be thinking, so what? I can afford my payments, I'll just wait it out. But that's where things get really dangerous. The problem with being underwater isn't today, it's when life happens tomorrow. And that distinction matters, because most financial disasters don't begin on a normal Tuesday when everything is fine. They begin the moment your life changes and your house can no longer protect you. Imagine you get offered your dream job in another state. Normally, you'd sell your house and use the profit for a down payment on a new one. But if you're underwater, you can't. To sell, you'd have to find $20,000 out of your own pocket just to make the bank whole. You are, effectively, a prisoner in your own home. Economists call this the lock-in effect, and it's freezing the entire housing market by stopping people from moving. That phrase sounds clinical, but the real-world version is brutal. It means the house you thought would give you freedom starts taking options away from you. But what if you lose your job or have a medical emergency? Now you can't afford the payments and you can't sell without taking a massive loss. That's when the threat of foreclosure starts knocking on your door. This isn't just a money problem, it's a massive source of stress for families who thought they were building a secure future. And here's what makes it even worse. An underwater homeowner is often still doing everything right. They're making payments, they bought a home, they followed the script, but the math moved against them anyway. And there are levels to this. Data experts at Adam have a category for seriously underwater. That's when you owe at least 25% more than your home is worth. So for that $380,000 house, you'd owe $475,000. As of the end of 2025, about 3% of all mortgage properties were in this much more dangerous group. That's a slight increase, and it's a trend we have to watch. Because once you get into seriously underwater territory, waiting it out becomes much harder. A small rebound in prices won't save you. You need a real recovery, and that can take years. So who are these 1.2 million homeowners? Overwhelmingly, they are people who just bought a house. They jumped into the crazy market of late 2022, 2023, and 2024. They paid top dollar, often with very little money down, because they thought the insane price growth from the pandemic would last forever. When the market hit a wall and started to reverse, they were the first ones to get wiped out. And that matters because this crisis didn't start with reckless speculators buying 10 houses. In many cases, it started with ordinary people trying to buy their first one. Specifically, a huge number of them used government-backed loans like FHA and VA loans. These programs are incredible tools that let people buy homes with as little as 3.5% down, or in the case of VA loans, with 0 down payment. They are the key to homeownership for so many first-time buyers and veterans. But this amazing opportunity comes with a hidden risk. When you only have 3.5% equity, a small 5% drop in your home's value is enough to put you deep underwater. You have no safety net. And that is exactly what happened. As we're about to see, the very loans that opened the door for millions of Americans have now become a trap. This isn't a huge collapse like in 2008. This is a targeted crisis hitting a specific group of people who bought at exactly the wrong time. And when we get to the city-level data in a minute, you'll see why some homeowners are merely uncomfortable, while others are already trapped in place with almost no escape route. The story of how over 1 million homeowners got here isn't about one single thing, but a perfect storm of economic forces. Think of it as the hangover from the biggest housing party in recent history. Between 2020 and the middle of 2022, the market went completely insane. Mortgage rates were at record lows, some under 3%, and the pandemic made everyone want more space. Buyers were everywhere, and prices exploded. The number of equity-rich homes in the US shot up from around 27% to an incredible 49% in just a few years. It felt like free money, and that feeling is important because bubbles don't just inflate prices, they inflate beliefs. People start to believe that what has been happening must continue happening. They stop seeing price growth as a phase and start seeing it as the new normal. That's when risk gets mispriced. That's when buyers convince themselves that overpaying is fine, stretching is fine, bidding wars are fine, and tiny down payments are fine, because the market will keep bailing them out. For a while it did, then it stopped. But that party had to end, and the person who turned on the lights was the Federal Reserve. The main cause of this crisis is the market's painful adjustment away from that era of easy money. To fight inflation, the Fed started one of the most aggressive series of interest rate hikes in history. And while they don't set mortgage rates directly, their actions have a huge impact. The average 30-year fixed mortgage, which was in the 3% range, skyrocketed, even touching 8% before settling into the 6 to 7% range through 2025. This hit the housing market like a sledgehammer. First, it destroyed affordability. A family that could easily afford a $500,000 home with a 3% rate suddenly found that the same monthly payment would only get them a $350,000 home at a 7% rate. Millions of buyers were instantly priced out. Demand disappeared overnight and home sales dropped to the lowest levels in decades. The math didn't get a little worse, it got brutally worse, fast. And when that happens, markets don't gently adjust, they seize up. Second, the high rates created what everyone now calls the golden handcuffs. Tens of millions of homeowners were sitting on mortgages with rates of 4%, 3%, or even lower. They looked at the 7% rates and knew that moving would be financial suicide. Selling their current home to buy another, even for the same price, would mean trading their cheap mortgage for an expensive one, potentially doubling their monthly payment. So, everyone stayed put. This caused the number of homes for sale to freeze at historic lows. This combination, demand collapsing and supply freezing, created a very weird, stagnant market. And this is where the underwater crisis really began. Because stagnant markets are deceptive, they don't always produce dramatic headline crashes. Sometimes they just slowly punish the weakest balance sheets first. And that's exactly what happened here. With fewer buyers, prices stopped going up. In many parts of the country, price growth just stopped. JP Morgan even predicted that national home prices would have 0% growth in 2026. In other areas, especially the pandemic boomtowns like Austin and Phoenix, prices started to fall. This is the key moment. For someone who bought a house in 2017 and had years of equity built up, a 5% price drop was a bummer, but not a disaster. They still had a massive cushion. But for the person who bought in 2023 with only 3.5% down, that same 5% drop was devastating. It didn't just erase their small equity cushion, it pushed them immediately underwater. Same market, same decline, completely different outcome depending on when you bought and how much protection you had. This wasn't a 2008 style crash. The national market didn't implode. In fact, by the end of 2025, total homeowner equity was still considered remarkably strong. But that hides the pain that's happening in specific areas. The market is just returning to normal after years of insane growth. But for those who bought at the absolute peak, this return to normal feels like a personal financial crisis. And that phrase, return to normal, is one of the most dangerous in housing, because what feels normal at the national level can still be financially devastating at the household level. We're about to dive into the specific loan types that became a financial tripwire and show you the exact neighborhoods that are sinking first. But before we do, if this video is making you think, do me a favor and smash that subscribe button. The market changes every week, and we drop videos like this to keep you ahead of the game with real data. Don't get caught by surprise. Subscribe now. If the market change was the storm, then low equity loans were the ships that weren't ready for it. To understand why so many homeowners are underwater, you have to look at the loans they used. And at the center of this problem are government-backed mortgages, especially FHA and VA loans. Let's be clear, these are not bad loans. They've been a key to homeownership for millions of Americans. An FHA loan lets you buy a home with as little as 3.5% down. A VA loan lets eligible veterans buy with zero down payment at all. For many people, these loans are the only realistic path into the market. Without them, homeownership would be even more out of reach. That's why this story is so uncomfortable. The problem isn't that these buyers were irresponsible. The problem is that they were highly exposed. During the buying frenzy, these loans were more popular than ever because saving up a 20% down payment on a super expensive house was almost impossible. These programs did exactly what they were supposed to do. They helped people buy a home. But here's the trap. The very thing that makes them so great, the low down payment, also makes you incredibly vulnerable. Think of your equity as a financial shield. If you put 20% down on a $500,000 house, you start with a $100,000 shield. If the market drops 10%, your house is now worth $450,000. It stings, but you're fine. You still have $50,000 in equity. Now think about the FHA buyer. They buy that same $500,000 house with 3.5% down, which is only $17,500. They start with a tiny shield. When that same 10% drop happens, their house is worth $450,000, but they still owe around $482,500 on their mortgage. Not only is their shield gone, but they are now $32,500 in debt to the bank. For the VA buyer who put 0% down, any price drop puts them underwater instantly. This isn't a theory, it's happening right now. Recent analysis showed that of the loans made in 2024, an insane 25% of VA loans and 17% of FHA loans were already underwater by the end of 2025. Overall, 9.6% of all VA loans and 5.7% of FHA loans are underwater. This shows how incredibly sensitive these new homeowners are to any price drop. And those numbers tell you something bigger than just these loans carry risk. They tell you exactly where the cracks in this market are forming first. This was made worse by the fear of missing out, or FOMO. Buyers saw homes going up by $100,000 in a year and felt they had to get in at any cost. They overpaid and stretched their finances to the absolute limit, all because they assumed prices would never go down. They created a perfect storm for the crisis we see today. And FOMO doesn't just make you buy, it makes you buy badly. It makes you rationalize bad timing, thin margins, weak reserves, and dangerous loan structures. Because waiting feels even scarier. On top of that, FHA loans have an extra cost called a mortgage insurance premium, MIP. This fee protects the lender if you default and makes it even harder to build up your equity shield in the early years. It's a painful irony. The programs made to help buyers have left them the most exposed. They played by the rules to get the American dream, but they were unknowingly walking a tightrope with no safety net, just as the wind started to blow. And notice how unfair this timing is. The people who bought earlier got years of soaring prices and ultra cheap rates. The people who bought later got peak prices, higher rates, and a market that stopped rescuing them. Same dream, completely different entry point. That is one of the hidden truths of housing. Outcomes are often shaped less by how hard you worked and more by what cycle you entered. And in just a moment, when we look at the map, you'll see exactly where that timing punished buyers the most. This crisis isn't happening everywhere equally. It's more like a series of local floods. To understand the problem, you have to look at a map, and the pattern is crystal clear. The areas that saw the most insane growth during the pandemic are now ground zero for negative equity. The Sun Belt, which was the hottest area of the housing boom, is now the primary hotspot. States like Florida and Texas are now seeing the highest numbers of underwater homeowners. These were the places everyone was rushing into. Remote workers, investors, relocators, people fleeing expensive coastal cities, people chasing sunshine, space, and lower taxes. For a while, that demand looked unstoppable. Now the same places are showing what happens when prices run too far ahead of durable fundamentals. Let's look at Florida. During the boom, the market market was on fire, but when things turned, the correction was fast. In Lakeland, Florida, the underwater rate shot up to a crazy 11%. Nearby Cape Coral was at 10%. In just 1 year, the average homeowner in Florida saw their equity drop by tens of thousands of dollars. In fact, recent reports show that Florida counties now make up 16 of the 50 riskiest housing markets in the entire country. And Florida's problem is especially dangerous because it's not just about prices. It's also about insurance costs, affordability pressure, and volatility colliding at the same time. In other words, some homeowners are getting squeezed from the asset side and the monthly payment side simultaneously. Their home value weakens while the cost of holding the home keeps rising. That is not a normal slowdown. That is a squeeze. It's a similar story in Texas. Austin, a tech city that had one of the biggest price run-ups, now has an underwater rate of 9.2%. San Antonio is at 8.8%. These are cities where people were bidding hundreds of thousands over asking just a few years ago. Now, many who bought at the peak are completely trapped. And once a city goes from must-own boomtown to correction zone, the psychological shift matters almost as much as the financial one. Buyers disappear faster, sellers panic faster, and homes that once looked like guaranteed winners suddenly start feeling radioactive. The pain is also showing up in other pandemic boomtowns in states like Arizona and Idaho. These places attracted a ton of remote workers, which drove prices to levels that just weren't sustainable. Now that the market is correcting, these are the areas with tons of new buyers slipping underwater. These cities didn't just rise fast, they rose with a narrative behind them. The narrative was that migration would continue forever, demand would remain explosive, and price growth would keep rewarding late buyers. When that narrative breaks, it leaves people holding peak cycle mortgages in markets that no longer behave like boomtowns. But when we look at the states with the highest percentage of seriously underwater homes, people who owe 25% or more than their home is worth, a different map appears. These aren't the pandemic boom states. These are states with long-term economic problems. The states leading the scary list are Louisiana, 10.7%, Mississippi, 8.3%, and Kentucky, 7.9%. An expert at Adam pointed out that these states have weaker price growth over time, which makes it hard for homeowners to build up an equity shield. In Louisiana, factors like slow price growth and rising insurance costs have made things even worse, with some parishes having seriously underwater rates over 17%. So you have two different crises happening at once. You have the new buyers in the Sun Belt who just went underwater, and you have homeowners in economically weaker states who have been stuck there for a long time. That distinction matters because one group is dealing with a recent shock, while the other is dealing with a chronic condition. One crisis is fast and visible, the other is slow and persistent. Together, they show that underwater housing isn't just one story. It's a cluster of different market failures happening at the same time. On the flip side, places in the Northeast and Midwest are doing great. States like Vermont, New Hampshire, and Rhode Island have the highest percentage of equity-rich homes in the country. Vermont is number one, with an incredible 87% of mortgaged homes considered equity-rich. These markets never had the crazy boom, so they aren't having the bust. And that should tell you something important. Boring markets often age better than exciting ones. The places that looked less glamorous during the frenzy often look far healthier when the frenzy ends. This geographic difference is the most important story in housing for 2026. Your risk is less about the national news and more about your zip code. If you bought in Austin, Texas in 2023 with a small down payment, your reality is totally different from someone who bought in Burlington, Vermont. That's why broad national housing headlines can be so misleading. They flatten a market that is actually splitting apart underneath the surface. So what happens now? With 1.2 million homeowners trapped and millions more on the edge, the entire housing market gets stuck. As we talked about, an underwater homeowner can't sell, so they don't. This lock-in effect, combined with all the people who have super low mortgage rates, means there are almost no houses for sale. This creates a weird paradox. Even though demand is weak, prices aren't crashing nationally because inventory is so tight. Buyers have few choices, and sellers won't lower their prices unless they absolutely have to. The market is just stuck in the mud, and stuck markets create frustration on both sides. Buyers feel priced out and powerless. Sellers feel trapped and stubborn. Homeowners who want to move can't justify it. Homeowners who need to move often can't afford it. So the system doesn't clear normally, it just grinds. For the most vulnerable homeowners, the risk of foreclosure is getting very real. Foreclosure rates are still low compared to history, but they are rising. We saw a noticeable jump in foreclosure starts in 2025. This isn't the 2008 tidal wave, but it's a clear sign that the financial pain is growing. And the reason that matters is because foreclosures don't need to explode nationally to damage local markets. They only need to cluster in the wrong places. Once that happens, they start influencing comparable sales, neighborhood psychology, and lender caution. That's how a contained problem can begin to spread. So what does the rest of 2026 look like? It's a mix of good news and bad news. On the good side, things are starting to look better for buyers. The biggest factor is mortgage rates. After peaking, rates are finally starting to fall, with many economists predicting they could dip into the high 5s or low 6s during 2026. Fannie Mae, for example, is forecasting rates to hit 5.7% by the end of the year. This will help a lot with affordability and might start to unfreeze the market. Even a modest move downward matters because affordability has been crushed for so long that buyers don't need perfect conditions to come back. They just need conditions that are less punishing. Also, wages are expected to grow faster than inflation, which means people will have more buying power. This could lead to the first real drop in monthly mortgage payments we've seen since 2020. That sounds encouraging. But before anyone assumes the danger is over, remember this: national stabilization does not automatically rescue the people who are already underwater. A steadier market can stop the bleeding without reversing the damage. But the risk is still there, especially in those regional hotspots. While national home prices might go up a little, some forecasts predict prices will fall in 22 of the 100 largest US cities, especially in the South and West. For homeowners already underwater in places like Austin, another price drop could push them deeper into the red, raising the risk of foreclosures in those areas. And that's the hidden tension inside 2026. Improving conditions overall can coexist with worsening pain in the exact cities where people are already weakest. The big story for 2026 is this: nationally, the market is stabilizing, but the pain in the Sunbelt is real and could get worse. The hidden time bomb is still ticking. And the real question is, who can hold on long enough for stabilization to matter? Because markets can stabilize on paper while individual households still break under the strain. So to recap, we have a growing number of underwater homeowners, mostly people who recently bought in overheated cities with low down payment loans. This was all caused by the market slamming the brakes after years of easy money. But the deeper lesson is more important than the headline number. The danger in housing usually doesn't come from the obvious moment when everyone knows things are bad. It comes from the transition period, when yesterday's assumptions are still guiding today's decisions even though the market has already changed. What's the way out? If you're one of the homeowners who is currently underwater, the best that you can do is wait. Time is your friend here. Forecasts for 2026 show the market stabilizing. If you can keep making your payments, waiting for prices to recover is usually the best move. This is not a 2008 style freefall. That distinction matters. In a true collapse, waiting can be fatal. In a stagnant or slowly recovering market, patience can be the bridge that gets you back above water. For those who have to move or are struggling to pay, there are options. With rates dipping, refinancing might be possible, especially with government programs for FHA and VA borrowers. If you are in financial trouble, talk to your lender immediately. They do not want to foreclose on your house and are more willing than ever to find a solution. The worst move is silence. The earlier you act, the more options you usually have. By the time panic fully sets in, many of the easiest solutions are already gone. And if you are looking to buy in 2026, you'll have more power, but you need to be smart. Understand your local market and please learn the lesson from this crisis. Buy with a healthy down payment if you can. That equity is your shield against whatever the market throws at you. Don't just ask whether you can afford the payment. Ask how much pain your balance sheet can absorb if prices stop rising. That question isn't sexy. It won't win a bidding war, but it might save you years of financial stress. The story of the 1.2 million underwater homeowners is a massive warning sign. It's a reminder that in housing, trees don't grow to the sky. buy. The decisions you make when you buy can affect you for years. Staying informed is your best defense. And maybe the biggest takeaway from all of this is that the housing market did not become safer just because the bidding wars cooled down. In some ways, it became more dangerous because now the consequences of overpaying are finally showing up. This is the part so many people miss. The real risk in housing often isn't buying during the crash. It's buying near the top while the crowd is still calling it normal. It's using a thin margin loan in a market with no room for error. It's assuming that because the national market looks okay, your neighborhood must be okay too. That kind of thinking is exactly how people get blindsided. So keep your eyes on the local data. Watch inventory, watch price cuts, watch foreclosure trends. Watch how much equity new buyers actually have. Because the next phase of this market won't be defined by one giant national collapse. It will be defined by where stress quietly builds, where weak equity meets weak demand, and where homeowners run out of room to absorb another hit. And that's why this story matters even if you're not underwater today. Because the same forces that trapped these homeowners, bad timing, thin equity, overconfidence, and a changing market, can trap the next group too. The names and zip codes may change, the mechanics won't. Thanks for watching. If you found this valuable, please like this video and subscribe for more deep dives into what's really happening in the housing market. Your financial future is too important to leave to chance.